I deliver the package of darkness!
Hey there, Gothamites. Brian Ward here with another episode of the Arkham Sessions. With me, as always, is the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City and now Beach City, Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian.
I am super psyched because this is our finale episode for Steven Universe's inaugural season.
Yeah.
We should make a couple of announcements first. For starters, we put up last week or about 10 days ago a poll for our patrons to decide what we're going to cover next. And they did not disappoint. We had a lot of votes, and about 65% of them ish decided on one thing. Drea, do you know what that one thing is?
Well, based on how things were going, my guess is that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is the next topic area of the show.
Yes.
Now, so here's something that's interesting. This week, there have been a number of Batman announcements, including, of course, the animated film, The Long Halloween, had already been announced, but a clip came out so people could see some of that. The film Injustice, Gods Among Us was announced as the next DC animated film following Batman The Long Halloween Part 2.
Interesting.
The full, the sort of the solid announcement about another Batman animated series led by Bruce Timm has been announced for HBO.
Bruce Timm, Matt Reeves of the Batman.
Yeah.
And J.J. Abrams.
Right. And then some additional information about the Batgirl live action film came out.
Interesting.
So this week has just been pretty busy with those DC announcements. And then here we are. For the last several years, we've covered mostly DC topics, right?
Yeah.
Mostly Batman. We veered into Doom Patrol, which is based on DC characters. We're talking about Steven Universe.
Which is not DC, but it is on HBO Max.
And now we're about to go into about a year of covering the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the films,
The other side.
the many amazing series that have come out on Disney Plus, WandaVision, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the upcoming Loki series. There's really good news about Black Widow finally being released in theaters. So we're about to take this huge step into the Marvel world, while at the same time this exciting news about DC expanding their titles and just coming out with a lot of exciting stuff. So I feel kind of weird about it. I feel like we should definitely, I don't know, we're going to be a busy show.
We are going to be a busy show. And you can decide what we cover next by going to Patreon and joining for $3, because I have a feeling we're going to offer up a number of these shows, especially that animated series, as a possible contender for what's coming next after we cover the entirety of the MCU. And by the way, this is basically all the movies leading up to Endgame.
Right.
Including Endgame, and then those 3 series on Disney Plus. So, we're not going to continue with the Marvel Cinematic Universe going forward after that, because I feel like we would never catch up. It would just always, we would have a lot of material going forward.
Well, I think it's also important to mention that for folks who are new to the show or are curious about our coverage of Marvel and this next phase, I also just want to encourage the idea that we occasionally do take a pause in what we're covering to cover something that, let's say the Snyder Cut, for instance. That was a movement that requires our attention. And I think no matter what we're doing, we would drop our, kind of take a pause in our direction on the pathway we're on and take a look at that. So this is just a friendly reminder for folks, especially for folks who are more DC leaning or almost exclusively DC, that we do kind of veer off to cover things that we know they enjoy and things that we're really interested in watching and analyzing as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the Snyder Cut, because we also put to our patrons the question, do you want us to cover the Snyder Cut? And overwhelmingly, they said yes. So we are going to take a week off after this episode. And then the following week, we are going to cover the Snyder Cut of Justice League. And then the following week, we will begin our trek into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So we are going to be covering the Snyder Cut. And again, that's thanks to the patrons who voted. We should talk a little bit about this series, Steven Universe. Like I said, it's the finale episode of the inaugural season. I can't imagine not continuing and watching more Steven Universe in the weeks and days to come. We've been binging them like crazy, so I almost feel like we need to continue to watch them. But I will warn you, if you are watching them on Hulu, they are not in order. And I didn't know that.
Not only are they not in order, but some of the episodes in season 1 are actually supposed to be in season 2 and vice versa.
Yeah.
Which I didn't realize until you informed me.
Right before we started recording the show.
You're in this industry. Why is that happening? Are there reasons why on Hulu, for instance, they're in a certain order and seasons are covering certain episodes, and then in other places, because we're going by the official wiki, right?
Yeah. Well, it depends. Oftentimes it's due to production order or air date order. Like it very well could be that in certain cases a show might hold some episodes for a second season, or they might put forward the most important or the most exciting or what they feel like is the best episodes, because they want to bring in an audience and they want to lead with their strongest episodes. In a case like Steven Universe, it is mildly episodic, especially as you get to the end where you're following full arcs, which is why it's so surprising to me that Hulu has them out of order, because when I look at the wiki, it's neither in production order nor in air date order in terms of how we viewed it. It looks like it should have aired basically in the production order timeline. And I don't know why they have it that way, but just so folks are aware, full disclosure, Joyride, are both episodes that we watched as quote unquote season 1 episodes, and they are not in season 1. They are season 2 episodes. Meanwhile, Hulu has Shirt Club and Story for Steven as season 2 episodes, when they actually should have been prior to the finale of season 1. So, and Story for Steven, I felt like was an important episode because it follows the story of how Greg, Mr. Universe, met Rose Quartz, Steven's mother. So, I don't know why they're positioned this way on Hulu, but we found the error and we went back and we watched the episodes we were supposed to. So which ones did we watch in this batch? Well, beyond the fact that we watched a couple of episodes we didn't need to, we watched Horror Club, Winter Forecast, Maximum Capacity, Marble Madness, Rose's Scabbard, Open Book, Shirt Club, Story for Steven, The Message, Political Power, The Return, and the finale, Jailbreak. Drea, I want to talk to you about a lot of things because we learned a lot about the gems, their backstory. We learned a lot about a lot. So let me know what you like just picked up on and couldn't let go of in these final series of episodes.
Well, I certainly think that these episodes were iterative and as you said, episodic. They really build upon one another. Whereas in the early episodes, they're just sort of these one shots. They sort of they were adventures.
Yeah.
And I think the last few episodes we watched, I even turned to you and said, this could be a movie. You know, it moved along. The drama was more personal. The stakes were higher when they were defending the, Beach City and protecting the citizens from these alien invasions.
Yeah.
The stakes are high. There are real consequences now. And what I appreciated too is that you see the repercussions, you see the impact on the people that they have relationships with, the townsfolk, the friends they have, especially for Stephen. Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl don't really have relationships outside of the family, aside from maybe Stephen's father, Mr. Universe. And so it just had that gravity to it, and I appreciated that. Now, what I want to talk about may surprise you, but I promise there are connections here.
Okay.
We definitely need to address hoarding disorder.
Because of Greg.
Yes, and not so much the collection of items as the focus of attention here, but the almost the need to process relational loss. And in many ways, belongings, things, objects are sort of the holders of our memories. And I felt as though those stories that were taking place in these episodes were ones about addressing loss, addressing ruptures in relationships, and they're, especially for Greg, sort of how his lifestyle is a way that manifests these unprocessed losses. So I'll go more into that, but really I think even though we're going to start with the collection of possessions and sort of the psychology behind that, I think where it will lead is helping us understand relational loss. Yeah.
Greg's, and in this episode, Amethyst's, because we learn a lot about sort of Amethyst in this episode as well, and quite a bit about Pearl, which I want to talk about. But you've got us down this track of hoarding. So in this episode, maximum capacity, we open up Greg's storage unit and it's overflowing, and they decide to clean it. They decide to organize it. And it takes days, particularly because they find a set of videotapes for their favorite show, Little Butler. And and I think Little Butler is probably a cross between Webster and Mr. Belvedere, because he literally is a child, like an old man child that was sort of left on this family's doorstep, and they adopt him to be their butler. Apparently it's a show that both Greg and Amethyst were obsessed with. And when they find the tapes, their obsession restarts. It's rekindled. They go days just binging this TV series. And even though Greg tries to break out of the pattern, Amethyst keeps bringing him back in. Let's talk about this episode, because you instantly saw 3 boxes put out. Stephen, is going to organize the materials. He puts out 3 boxes, and you instantly said something. What did you say?
I was very proud of that moment. I said, well, that's essentially treatment for hoarding. That's what that looks like. There's a lot that goes on, of course, before you start to sort, but the sorting process is really integral to hoarding treatment. But let's back up, because I know folks probably want to know what hoarding disorder is and what it isn't. Now, it should be clear that we're looking at a storage unit. And for the most part, storage units are often very cluttered, overpacked, stacks of boxes and items, disorganized, not because of any kind of disorder. Most of us throw our belongings in there. It's a storage unit. That's sort of the whole point.
Ours was certainly messy.
Oh
for a while.
gosh, yes. So packing things, belongings, and even items that probably could be thrown away into a storage unit, there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually a very common experience, especially if you live in certain areas like Southern California, where space is needed in your home. And I know people who have 1 to 2 storage units, and I don't want to say that is necessarily anything to be concerned about, but we should think about Greg's lifestyle. So when we are introduced to him, we know that he essentially lives in his van, and we've been in his van, we've seen the clutter in his van. It's not unlivable. It's probably a little disorganized and messy, but I haven't seen anything that I'm concerned about in terms of his acquisition of belongings in his home. And he's also had opportunities to live in homes, not in vans.
Yeah.
And he's chosen to live in his van. And, I think that has a lot to do with his personality and the freedom that he wants. And we may, my guess is that we might learn a little bit more about the psychology of his choices there. But I just want to make it clear that his home, it looks to be okay. I don't have concerns about that. So most of this conversation is about that storage unit. Now, let's kind of review what hoarding disorder is. It is considered a clinical disorder. It was solidified in the DSM-5. And prior to that version of the Manual of Mental Health Disorders, it was more of a subcategory of a different disorder. So it was a pretty pivotal moment in the history of psychology.
Do you remember what other category it was a subcategory for?
It used to be in the OCD section of the manual. And I used to work quite a lot with patients with OCD, and there's a lot of overlap with, and I remember so much confusion from people who didn't specialize in this area. OCD is about cleanliness, and think Pearl, organization, cleanliness, tidiness. Why would hoarding be a subclass of this disorder? And the reality is that there is some overlap. The neuroimaging studies showed overlap in the neurobiology of these disorders. Similar medications were effective in treating these disorders. And if you think fundamentally about hoarding disorder, it's indecisiveness, it's anxiety, it's feelings of there are some compulsive responses. So I would say that there definitely are some similarities. But when a disorder is pulled out and kind of goes into its own category, it's a huge movement, because it means more attention and research and recognition for that disorder can happen. More people can turn to this as a health disorder that they relate to. There's just, I think, a lot of positive reactions and consequences of this disorder in particular becoming its own disorder. It still sits in the disorder class of obsessive compulsive and related disorders, so it still remains a part of that family, but is now its own category. So let's get into some of the different features of hoarding disorder. One, you need to be able to recognize in the patient a persistent difficulty discarding or parting with possessions, regardless of their value. So this would mean, in terms of Stephen's father, it would mean that like if you wanted to throw stuff away, he would be resistant to that he has the hesitancy and almost the inability to let go of those things. So you'd have to recognize that there's a level of distress associated with discarding items. Furthermore, obviously, because of the acquisition of items, the person is living in a situation where the accumulation of their possessions creates clutter and congestion and disrupts the living areas. So this means that in order to meet criteria for this disorder, you have to determine that the hoarding behavior compromises their lifestyle, their daily functioning. So this is where things get a little bit, could get into the gray area. Many people have seen these hoarding TV shows and they see the extremes. Like, of course you can't, if you can't move from room to room, like there are many examples where the camera people can barely move from room. There's like a little pathway. Of course they're going to meet criteria, but then, what happens in this instance where he doesn't have many living areas, so to speak. So is his storage unit kind of a part of his home life? Like at one point they're watching a TV show and they're in the storage unit watching the show that you mentioned. So I do wonder about that. And then finally, a couple things. I mentioned distress before. In order for a person to meet criteria for this disorder, there has to be significant distress or impairment in some area of their life. So if they're perfectly content, if they don't disclose or express any discomfort, anxiety, displeasure, they sort of are fine with it, and the areas of their life, their occupational functioning, their social functioning also seem to be fine, you wouldn't necessarily assign this disorder. And so you can imagine that somebody who doesn't have a lot of living space might be more apt to meet criteria, right? Like imagine people who have the economic background to have large living spaces. You may never notice any kind of disruption there or any kind of interference with their daily functioning.
Right.
And the other thing too is sort of the insight that somebody with, usually when you have these features, you notice these features, a person may not really express an attitude that this is uncomfortable living. And I think you see this a lot on the hoarding shows, right? That the resident of the place is like, I'm fine in this situation. I know it's messy. I admit things got out of control. And you often think, how did it get out of control? Like, how did it get from non-clutter to this situation? And often it's about the underlying emotional pain that a person is in. And that part is missed a lot of times. And this is why, let's talk about the intervention. This is why doing a big sweep, which Oprah used to do on her show, which was incredibly damaging, incredibly harmful. Just do a big sweep while they're not there and clean everything out, come back to a pristine house. That is almost traumatic in itself and not recommended for treatment for hoarding disorder. There is a coordination and collaboration between the resident and the practitioner, and you work together much like the format that Stephen suggests, these categories. What do we keep? What do we give away or sell? And what do we throw in the garbage, or in his terms, burn? And that's a very effective strategy. You go through, in many cases, item by item, bag by bag, and you sit down and you make the decision. And I've done this treatment multiple times and found that this is sort of the key. If you're doing this with someone who doesn't have hoarding disorder, it's just clutter. Spring cleaning, you can get through it pretty effectively. Somebody with hoarding disorder is going to struggle with this process. There will be a lot of painful emotions, a lot of difficulty discarding items. And then, as I mentioned, the underlying psychache comes up. Why is it hard to get rid of this?
Psychache.
Well, this emotional pain, that, deep emotional pain that they're holding on to.
I just love the term psychache.
It's the best one I could think of to describe this deep-seated, long-standing dysregulation, this deep pain that is felt emotionally. And that's where the work is really done. Help us understand, what was the loss or rupture? Why was that painful for you? And what happens if the items are lost to you? What if they're discarded? What does that mean about you? Are you still able to feel whole? Are you able to feel healed? And often, I do remember working with a man who had said, if the items are lost to him, if they're discarded, he feels like that's a part of him, that he will feel sort of fragmented, and he won't really know how to deal with that feeling.
Yeah.
And then another patient that I had, this is so interesting. He collected newspapers and magazines and all of these stacks and stacks of magazines and news articles, clippings. It was not the way that we live. He could barely go into many of his rooms. But what's interesting is that his justification was that in the newspapers, there was information that was vital that he needed. He needed to have the information. And it's almost as if he believed his brain was his home. Like, I need to know all of this information, and so I have to hold on to this. So you have to think too, in the digital age, this is similar to people who hoard digital information. The inability to delete emails, maybe, right? And especially ones that are unimportant.
I feel seen.
This is you. And I have to share a story. So we talked about the importance of throwing out newspapers that were 20, 30, 40 years old. Why? What information is there? And the idea too is like, what if you discard it? And he'd say, I'd feel anxiety. I'd feel worry. I'd feel like I must have it. Something bad is going to happen. I'm going to be unready. And we would test out that theory. Let's throw away some stacks and then see how you feel. And ultimately, he became comforted. He was able to deal with that unease, except something happened. He went on a game show.
Oh, no.
You're going to love this story. This is right up your alley. He went on a game show. And the question... So I'm going to be mindful. I'm not going to say the name of the game show because I'm protecting his identity. He was given a question, like a trivia question, and he knew the answer because he had been reviewing information, like events,
right,
in these newspapers,
right,
dating back dozens of years. And he got the response, like he got it right, and he won the prize. And so here I am telling him this information is useless. You have to discard it. He has direct proof that knowing this stuff actually improves the quality of his life, because it did. So I admit that, here we have to be realistic. Now, the chances that this would happen are pretty slim, but it just reaffirmed for him that he needed to continue hoarding. really, really challenging.
But only if he
situation.
planned on doing another game show. You know, if he weren't doing another game show, then he wouldn't need that knowledge.
Sure. And so as you can imagine, what started the hoarding behavior was an interpersonal loss. And that led to, just over the years, an increased amount of acquiring what you and I would consider trash, like garbage.
Yeah.
And so I'm using those terms in ways that we would, and in terms that we would use it with Steven Universe's father. Is this trash? Like, are you holding on to items that could be thrown away?
Yeah. Now it's interesting that you're equating this to. I mean, yes, you looked at his storage unit and you think hoarding because he tries to put a standee in there from the car wash and everything just starts coming out. But would you place Greg in the position of hoarder? Because he didn't really seem to be all that bothered with the idea of cleaning it out. He in fact kept, talking about the need to. Whereas, if I look at a show like Hoarders, they are pained at the thought of cleaning it out or losing stuff. And Greg didn't really seem all that bothered by it.
I agree with you. There was one scene where they found the tapes.
Yeah.
So Amethyst and Greg were distracted by these old VHS tapes of this
Well, let's talk about
show.
why though, because but right before that, they end up finding the photo of Greg and Rose Quartz together, which we'd already seen in the episode where Steven needed to find the light cannon that his mom had in the storage unit. And it has like a broken, it's a broken frame, broken glass. And she sees that and is instantly down. Like you can see that she is emotionally distressed by seeing this photo of Rose and Greg together. And she's the one who finds the tapes and uses the tapes to basically distract Greg. And so in this episode, she's the one who is almost the hoarder because...
Well, right. And if we've seen Amethyst's room. So I wonder if she is more likely to receive this diagnosis than he would. She is, we talked about Amethyst before. She's somewhat mentally disorganized. Like she is disorganized in her lifestyle, but I would also consider her somewhat mentally disorganized. Maybe she has a neurodevelopment disorder. She has difficulty staying focused. She loses attention. She's distracted easily. And we've talked about how that bothers other people. And it's really important then to acknowledge that it might be her ADHD or some other feature that leads to her clutter. You wouldn't assign this diagnosis if it's due to some other, maybe more appropriate diagnosis. So that's one really important step. If there's a cognitive defect, a neurocognitive disorder, or as I said, a neurodevelopmental disorder, you would probably assign that one. But going back to Amethyst for actually a different reason, she is also seemingly sad about the loss of Rose. And we see this play out as they're watching the show. Like, first of all, it gets a little creepy. They can't untether themselves from the screen. They're almost mesmerized.
He tries, but she reels him back in time and time again.
I wonder if you can play this clip. There is this moment where Amethyst and Greg have an argument.
Yep, let's play it now.
I can't stay here and humor you. I have to be there for my son.
Well, what about me, huh? I had someone who was always there for me until she started hanging out with you.
Don't do this, Amethyst. Seriously.
I bet you'd stay for her.
You wouldn't.
What? Do this? Hey, Greg. Turn around. Check it out.
I know you're doing it. I want to be friends again. I really do. But I can't let you do this to me again.
Stop!
This really struck me as a manifestation of how their trauma is experienced similarly and differently. That, of course, Greg lost the love of his life. He is still in recovery from that. Amethyst is very reactive. And I'm not saying that one response is better or more healthy than the other, more so that what she ends up doing is getting further and further into a withdrawal, like further into this sort of avoidance. Let's get lost in this show that holds a lot of memories for us. And in a way, she is experiencing a connection. She's experiencing a really important interpersonal moment together. It's really positive, actually, for both of them. But when he tries to pull away because he needs to move forward, she pulls him back in. And she does something that's even more fascinating to me. She morphs into Rose. And Stephen notices that this is very unhealthy and very disturbing. And it is, because Greg has no power. He has no agency here. And he's being re-traumatized by this whole process. But my fixation is on Amethyst, because she's decided, it's almost as if her emotional pain comes out this way. Like, I'm going to harm you.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to take all these feelings that I have a hard time with, that I haven't resolved, and I'm going to make you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And there's someone, I think it's this episode, or maybe it's a later episode, someone says, you like to do this. You like to make me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. I was fascinated by this, the sadness of Amethyst basically revealing that she lost her one best friend, her one true friend, and was taking it out on Greg because he basically took her away from Amethyst simply by spending all his time, or all their time together. And then, of course, she died. And so Amethyst was left without this friend. And so jealousy turned into anger. And by the way, that's not the...
And some inappropriateness. Like the boundaries are really sort of interesting, because Amethyst is suggesting, and there's this weird history, like she's done this before. So there's this suggestion that she's appeared as Rose to him, and she's a shapeshifter. She's, she has this, she has a tad bit of that Loki personality, right? Kind of a little bit mischievous.
Right.
But I think she also crosses the line. And again, that could be a result of her childhood abuse and the fact that she's not really been able to form more healthy boundaries. If anything, Greg could be a very helpful person in her own sorrow and grief. So seeing that play out was really, really interesting. And I think, you mentioned the friendship piece. Pearl also lost her best friend and or partner.
Yeah, there's a partnership.
Yeah, there's an intimacy between her and Rose.
Yeah.
And she is not doing well at all.
No. The episode Rose's Scabbard really tells us a lot, because Pearl sees Rose as someone who confided in her. Pearl believes that she's the only person that Rose told all of her secrets to, and literally all of her secrets. And she becomes angry and hurt over the fact that Stephen knows something Pearl doesn't about Rose, which is that the lion was something that belonged to Rose, and that the storage capacity in the lion's mane was a thing, and Pearl had no idea. And in fact, Pearl can't access it. She tries to put her hand in the main, and it doesn't work. So only Steven has this ability, and she is really, really hurt over this. In fact, I want to play this little clip of this moment after Steven retrieves Rose's sword, which has gone missing or has been missing for years. Let's play this here.
Rose kept many things secret, even from us.
But not from me! I was the one she told everything!
Yo, you're not the only one who misses her.
You can't understand how I feel! None of you had what we had!
She probably just wanted to protect you like everyone else.
What do you know? You've never even met her!
Pearl takes this opportunity to strike at Steven. And now we sort of see this animosity towards Steven from a couple of different...
Yeah, which isn't unlike a parent who feels a sense of anger and sadness, grief, and even resentment toward a child after the other caregiver has passed away, for reasons including that child actually reminds them of that person. You know, you are just like them, but you are not them. Yeah. That sort of sentiment. It's actually quite common, and it creates a number of difficult emotions. You don't want to be resentful and hateful toward that person. You don't want to strike out against them, but they hold, you know, in many ways, especially if they're related to them, they look like them. They have features like them. They even have mannerisms like them. And it's not their fault. It's not their fault. But they strike this response, you know, they cause this response. And that is, you know, very clear that manifests with between Steven and Pearl.
I do want to play this bit because it's after Pearl explodes and runs off with the sword and scabbard. She goes back to the strawberry battlefield and is sitting alone, and she demands to be left alone when Steven comes after her. And she begins asking Steven a series of questions that I think tell us a lot about Pearl. Let's take a listen.
Pearl, you have to tell me what's wrong.
Sometimes you even sound like her. Do you remember this place? Do you have any of her memories? We were right here, over 5,000 years ago. Pearl. Yes? I'm going to stay and fight for this planet. You don't have to do this with me. But I want to! I know you do. Please, please understand. If we lose, we'll be killed. And if we win, we can never go home. Why would I ever want to go home if you're here? My Pearl, you're wonderful. Everything I ever did, I did for her. Now she's gone. But I'm still here. Sometimes I wonder if she can see me through your eyes. What would she think of me now?
Well, I think you're pretty great.
Now remember, Rose on the videotape that she left for Steven says that she is going to be half of Steven. That she is still a part of him.
Because that's his, like the gem that is a part of him was her gem.
Presumably.
Is that? And that's important because, as I understand it, the crystal gems, like their bodies are holographic. They're not, you know, their bodies can be destroyed, but as long as their gems are intact, they can restore.
Right.
But Steven is a human boy.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that she cannot manifest her physical form, but in that gem is maybe her personality, her memories. Like maybe there is something he can access from that. And people who've seen the show and seen it, its an entirety, are just yelling at us now. Like
they're
there's
just,
so much more. I'm sure that we're.
But that's also the fun. That's the fun of listening to us
for
discover it for the first time. Let's talk about Garnet, because a huge revelation was made about Garnet. We learned that the war existed. We learned that Rose decided to turn against the other gems who were essentially invading Earth. They were going to conquer Earth. And Rose decided she'd had enough. Pearl decided to fight alongside her. And we now know that the threat that is coming from the homeworld is these new gems who are more technologically advanced, and they're basically a nightmare for the gems that are currently on Earth, the last of the gems who are trying to protect the Earth. And the gang is basically captured and taken up to like a mothership. Interestingly, Steven tries to rescue his friends, and he ends up meeting a couple of new characters. One is Ruby, who is about the same size as Steven, wears a bandana. Ruby is desperately trying to find Sapphire, and Ruby can hear Sapphire singing and is trying to find the voice. Once Ruby and Sapphire find one another, there is definitely this love that is felt between the two. I mean, and it is a palpable, passionate love.
Like your sense is that it was romantic.
It feels romantic to me because there's like this like kiss moment, and it's just this moment of I will never leave you again. We will always be together. It was a very passionate moment. And sure enough, they dance, and when they dance, they fuse into Garnet. So we learn that Garnet all this time has been a fusion of two other gems. And this was mind-blowing for me. And it also makes so much sense as to why she was so excited and encouraging of Steven and Connie becoming Stevani. Like, we now understand what it meant for her to say, you're not two people.
Right.
And you're not one person.
And so she sort of transcends everyone's understanding or constructs of the self, because she is two people fused as one.
And she's almost like a relationship.
Well, yeah, because I think before I always understood fusing as a tactic. Like they weaponize this.
Yeah.
When they are facing a huge threat, the gems fuse. That's how they get stronger and bigger and more mighty. You know, that's their combat technique.
Yeah.
And yet Garnet is letting us know in this episode that fusion is for other reasons. It's not just for war.
Yeah.
It's not just for fighting.
Yeah.
And it's not just to make yourself stronger.
Well, Jasper, the big bad of this episode, says that, only the weak fuse. It's just an attempt to make weak gems stronger or seem stronger. And when we see the overwhelming joy in Garnet's face when Stevani exists, and when we see Garnet's overwhelming joy when Ruby and Sapphire are reunited, to me, it also basically said, this is a relationship. This is what it means to find your other half. This is like, you don't want to be apart. You will fuse forever. And you know, you never want to be your separate halves again.
Like, this is your authentic self.
Yeah. My authentic self is being in this relationship with you. And
As evidenced also by the distress that Ruby and Sapphire experience when they're apart. It seems as though in order for them to feel that they are whole, that they are authentically themselves, they need to be fused together. And I know a lot of this comes from Greek mythology, that there is, the mythos of this idea, this kind of like all of us are actually a half person.
Yeah.
And we are in search of our other half. This is a concept that is very ingrained in literature and in mythology. It's interesting how it comes up here, that there are some elements of gender identity and elements of acceptance to this. It's also interesting that not everybody chooses to do this.
Yeah.
That this is this is the path they chose. This is the path that seems right for them.
Yeah, I thought it was a beautiful episode. I loved it. And more Garnet is becoming my favorite character in the entire show. Which, by the way, we never told our listeners who you became in the test, or who it revealed you. No, we never actually said.
Did?
We teased it and never mentioned it. You were always afraid that you would be Pearl. Who did it turn out that you were when you took this personality test?
When I took this very valid test, very evidence-based test, and answered 5 questions online, it told me that Garnet was the crystal gem that I am most like.
Yeah. How do you feel about that?
Which surprised me because, again, I thought, I'm going to be Pearl.
Yeah.
And again, I have much more, just like with Amethyst, I have much more respect and understanding for Pearl now, knowing the history of her relationships and how she got to be where she is.
Yeah.
I feel, how do I feel about it? I really like Garnet. I feel like Garnet is who I hope to be one day. So it's aspirational.
Yeah.
Did you take the test?
I took the test.
Who did you end up being?
I'm Amethyst.
Yeah.
Apparently. you look at me and go, yeah, that seems about right. This is a very valid test we've established. Like the sorting hat is not valid because it put you in something that you
we don't talk about
that you clearly are.
No, we don't talk about.
We know where you belong, but that one's not valid. This one is valid because you're Garnet.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that one had much more questions. Like that one's a lot more questions.
The Pottermore quizzes,
yeah.
They're much more elaborate.
Yeah. But not as accurate, apparently.
Absolutely. Like completely trash. I think I took it several times and I still ended up being in the house that I do not think I belong in. But that's another story.
Which house is that?
Oh, I'm not saying.
Okay.
I think we know which house I belong in.
Yeah. And it's the one that you kept getting.
No, it's not.
So I feel like there are so many other things that we could be talking about, but we've talked about hoarding and whether or not Greg is a hoarder, whether or not Amethyst is a hoarder. We talked about the love that Pearl obviously has for rose quartz. We talked about Garnet and discovering that Garnet is a fusion. We need to talk about Greg. We need to talk about Greg and his meeting of Rose. Like every time I see Rose, I just feel warm inside. There's something about her. There's something about the design. Her voice is wonderful. There's just something about that character that does exactly what they say she does to people in the show. And I don't know how it works. I don't know how they came to this design, and I don't know how they came to that voice, but the blending of the two make her just this wonderful, wonderful character to watch. And And we got to see how she met Greg. She met him at his concert, his beach concert, where she was literally the only attendee. And there's this wonderful line that she has when he decides to give up his tour for her. There's this great exchange. Let me play it here for you.
Please go away.
I'm sorry, did I?
You're awfully cute, and I really want to play with you. But your life is short and you have dreams. I won't let you give up on everything you want.
Well, that's gonna be a problem.
Huh?
You're everything I want!
This is just a wonderful moment. And I don't know that it means anything to you psychologically speaking, but I wanted to play it because I love the moment. Makes me feel good.
It's a very emotional moment, and I think it helps drive this story for sure.
Yeah.
That they are, they're not supposed to be together, that she is potentially, I'm thinking about the show Invincible. Like, she's thousands and thousands. She could live up to be thousands of years old if they don't have Steven, if she doesn't have a child. And really, they're literally from different planets.
Yeah.
And yet their love for each other is so meaningful and so big that all those things don't matter.
Yeah.
And Steven is a product of that kind of love, which says a lot about Steven's personality, his compassion. I think that says a lot about how he relates to others. That maybe, what we were saying about Rose, like, that's Rose.
Mm-hmm.
That is a part of him.
Mm-hmm.
So here we are. We are done.
Yeah. Done with season 1. What did you think? I mean, this is a few weeks ago, we would have said that, that we were nervous about this show because we didn't know what it was going to uncover. Mm-hmm. And really up until just a couple weeks ago, we were kind of saying we were right. Now it's completely different.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I'd like to return to it at some point.
Yeah, me too.
It definitely, it did what people say it was going to do.
Yeah.
It went into a lot of directions.
Yeah.
But in cohesive ways and in psychological ways that are fascinating. Mm-hmm. So at some point, what would it be, like 2025 when we wrap up everything in Marvel? We'll likely come back to it. There's a movie, apparently.
Yeah.
A Steven Universe movie that we may want to check out.
And another series, like an epilogue series,
yeah.
I guess. One thing that I wanted to bring up, and because this show, I don't know that I necessarily get the tears from the show yet. Like, I could see where it would send people that way, and I could see where in the future I might get all teary. But I will say this, just on a whim, I looked up on YouTube for the theme song, and I saw there was an extended version of the theme song. And then I saw that there was a Comic-Con panel where the voice actors did the extended version of the theme song. And I'm not going to lie.
You cried?
Yeah. Like, I mean,
Wow.
it was a tear, like a single tear fell down my cheek, the song was just this overwhelming sense,
Yeah.
and
I think when it's played live in front of crowds of fans,
and the
who
way they
are-
edited it with the
and they're dressed up as their
cosplayers and
favorite characters,
Yeah.
and they're coming together in community.
It was a great video.
It has such a powerful impact, again, because of what we talked about a couple of episodes ago in our podcast, that people who feel marginalized or who feel alienated or different watch this show and feel seen, feel included, feel validated in their identities, and then find one another in the fandom community, and it just builds from there.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised to learn that their panel just created an emotional experience for their fans.
It may have also just been that I got to see a Comic-Con panel. I'm reminded of what
maybe
it
it could
means.
be that.
I'm reminded
You
of what
haven't
it
been
means
to
go
Comic-Con for 2 years, and that's why you're crying.
So again, in 2 weeks, we're looking at June 4th. We will we will release the Snyder Cut. We will release our analysis of the Snyder Cut. So that gives you 2 weeks to take a viewing of the movie if you haven't seen it already. And trust me, it can be viewed in parts. It's designed to be viewed in parts. So if you just want to kind of binge it or just take a few days to watch it, I think that it's perfectly acceptable. But we've got a lot to say about it. And so you will get to hear that on June 4th. And then the following week, we will begin our dive into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And if we do everything right, you're actually going to hear us talk about Loki right around the time of the Loki finale, because it's an alternate timeline and we don't have to wait to the end of the whole thing to talk about it. And so I think we're gonna throw it in where we're almost watching it all together. Until next time, Drea, why don't you tell folks where they can find you online?
You can find me on drdreapsychology.com and on Twitter and Instagram at ArkhamAsylumDoc.
You can find me on Twitter at bward028. You can find me on Instagram at b_ward028. You can find us both on Twitter at Arkham Sessions and on Instagram at The Arkham Sessions. Go follow our family over at Fanbase Press. Come find us on Facebook and join us on Patreon to decide what we're going to cover going forward. Until next time, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
The Arkham Sessions.
I don't understand your human relationships. So, goodbye.